It was a quiet, almost serene afternoon in the heart of a suburban neighborhood. The rows of neatly trimmed lawns, the smell of freshly cut grass in the air, and the soft hum of wind through the trees gave the place an almost idyllic feel. Emily stood on her front porch, her gaze sweeping over the familiar faces of neighbors, most of whom had already begun their day's routines. In this peaceful environment, there was an underlying tension like the calm before a storm. Emily had always been a fighter, but it wasn't just for herself. It was for her daughter, Sophie. Sophie, though only 10 years old, had already faced more challenges than most adults could ever comprehend. Diagnosed with cerebral palsy, Sophie's condition often set her apart from other children, but not in the way Emily wanted. Her daughter was bright, confident, and determined. She loved school, loved the events that brought the community together, and had a smile that could light up the darkest room. But in this seemingly perfect neighborhood, Sophie's presence was an unwelcome one for some. As Emily glanced over at her daughter, who was sitting on the grass nearby, chatting excitedly with their neighbor's dog, she felt a pang of pride mixed with frustration. Sophie had a genuine love for life, yet it seemed that every time they attended one of the local school events, someone found a way to make her feel like she didn't belong. Emily hated seeing the world through her daughter's eyes when she had to witness the subtle looks of pity, the whispered conversations, and the uncomfortable glances that followed Sophie wherever she went. It wasn't just the kids, either. The adults, those who should have been her support system, were often the worst offenders. Take Karen, for example. Emily knew Karen well. They were neighbors after all. But Karen wasn't just any neighbor. She was the self-appointed queen of the HOA, the Homeowners Association. No one dared to break the sacred rules of the neighborhood, the ones that Karen enforced with an iron fist. Karen was obsessed with the aesthetic of the community, the clean lines, the perfect lawns, the picturesque view. Anything that threatened that image was not tolerated, and Sophie, with her disability, was beginning to fit into that category. It started at the last school event. Emily had watched from the sidelines as Sophie excitedly participated in the science fair. Sophie had struggled to set up her project, her hands shaking with determination, but she'd done it. And when she presented her project to the judges, Emily felt a surge of pride until Karen approached her. "I really think your daughter is, how should I say this, disrupting the aesthetic," Karen had said, her voice as cold as her eyes. People expect a certain level of decorum at these events, and, well, she's drawing too much attention. The words stung, but Emily bit her tongue, refusing to let Karen see her pain. She had heard it before, those insidious little comments about Sophie's disruption, but this time, something was different. Emily had seen Karen speak to the principal afterward, her words laced with a sense of authority and entitlement. The principal, Mr. Rogers, had looked uncomfortable, nodding in agreement as Karen spoke about accommodations and disturbances. Emily knew what that meant. Later that evening, after the kids were tucked in, Emily sat in the dimly lit living room, replaying the events in her head. She heard Karen's voice in her mind, saw her cold, calculated smile as she discussed Sophie as if she were an inconvenience. The tension in the room had become unbearable. Emily was no fool. She knew Karen had just set the wheels in motion to have Sophie banned from future events, citing her disability as the reason. The realization hit Emily hard. This wasn't just about a comment or a neighbor's judgment anymore. It was a fight for her daughter's dignity, and Emily knew she couldn't stand by and let this happen. Karen had pushed too far, and Emily was ready to fight back, no matter what it took. As she stared out the window at the quiet street, her mind raced. She had always been the one to protect Sophie, to shield her from the world's cruelty. But now, it seemed the world was coming to their doorstep. And this was only the beginning. Emily's heart raced as she picked up the phone to dial the school's main office. The weight of the conversation that was about to unfold felt heavy on her chest, a feeling that had become all too familiar in recent days. The events from the science fair still lingered in her mind like a dark cloud, especially the cruel, calculated way Karen had manipulated the situation. It was as if the HOA president had already declared Sophie's presence an inconvenience, a blemish on the perfect, curated image of the neighborhood. Emily's grip tightened around the phone as she prepared herself to face the forces conspiring against her daughter. The phone rang twice before it was answered by the school secretary. "Good afternoon, Maple Grove Elementary," the cheerful voice on the other end said. But Emily could hear the underlying tension in her own voice as she introduced herself. She briefly explained the situation, mentioning that she wanted to discuss Sophie's future participation in school events after the recent comments made by Karen. There was a pause on the line, the kind of pregnant silence that made Emily's anxiety surge. "Let me transfer you to Principal Rogers. He'll be able to help with that," the secretary said, her tone now more cautious. Emily's stomach twisted. She didn't need to be transferred. She needed action. Principal Rogers's voice came on the line a moment later, and Emily greeted him with the warmth she had hoped would melt any hint of bureaucracy. "Mr. Rogers, I'm calling regarding Sophie and her participation in school events." "Of course, Mrs. Hayes, I understand," he said, his voice soft but with a tremor of uncertainty. "I've received some feedback from Karen about Sophie being disruptive at the last event. I'm really sorry about this. I'll do everything I can to look into it." The words hit Emily like a slap to the face. Disruptive, her voice wavered, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Mr. Rogers, Sophie isn't disruptive. She's just trying to be a kid. She loves these events, and she works so hard to be a part of everything. What Karen is saying isn't true, and I don't understand why the school is allowing her to influence the situation this way." There was a moment of silence before he replied, "I understand your frustration, Mrs. Hayes, but as you know, Karen holds a lot of weight in our community. I can't make any promises, but I'll see what I can do." Emily's frustration deepened. Karen's influence wasn't just a passing comment. It was a power play, and the school, which should have been Sophie's safe haven, was bending to it. The conversation ended with no resolution, leaving Emily with a sinking feeling in her chest. The walls of her small world were closing in. As she hung up the phone, she stood there for a moment, the familiar hum of the house seeming to mock her. Sophie was upstairs, excited about the upcoming school event, a talent show this time, and Emily had no idea how to tell her that she might not be allowed to go. The thought of crushing Sophie's spirit, of taking away something that meant so much to her, made Emily's heart ache. The next few days passed in a haze of frustration and helplessness. Emily couldn't help but notice the subtle shifts in the neighborhood. It started with small things, murmured conversations behind closed doors, eyes quickly shifting away when she passed by. The neighbors, once friendly, were now distant. She hadn't even realized when it had happened, but Karen had worked her magic, turning everyone against them. It wasn't just about Sophie anymore. It was about the image Karen had created for the neighborhood, and Emily and Sophie were now threats to that image. One afternoon, as Emily and Sophie walked home from the grocery store, Emily noticed a group of parents standing on the sidewalk in front of one of the houses. They were chatting casually, but when Emily passed by, the conversation stilled. The laughter stopped. The eyes that followed them were colder now, more judgmental. She tried to ignore it, but the look on Karen's face, standing among them with that smug expression, made it impossible to brush off. "Mom, what's wrong with everyone?" Sophie asked quietly, tugging at Emily's sleeve. "Why is everyone acting so weird?" Emily knelt down, forcing a smile despite the knot in her stomach. "Don't worry, sweetie. Some people just have a hard time understanding how special you are." But the words didn't feel true. The weight of the situation, the isolation she now felt, was suffocating. Her daughter had always been the heart of her world, and now she was being treated like an outsider in their own neighborhood. Emily knew that something had to be done, but she didn't know where to start. Karen had already won the hearts of many, and Emily felt as if she were losing a battle she never signed up for. That night, Emily found herself alone at the kitchen table, her mind racing. She thought back to the early days of raising Sophie, to the moments when she'd first learned that her daughter would face challenges no child should have to face. The hospital visits, the tests, the worry, and the overwhelming love she had for her little girl. It had always been just the two of them against the world. But now, it wasn't just the world they were fighting against, it was their own neighbors. The people who should have been allies were now the ones trying to tear them down. The flashbacks came rushing in like waves. Sophie's first steps in physical therapy, the first time she learned to sign her name, the first time Emily held her close and whispered, "We're going to get through this together." Those were the moments that kept Emily going, the memories that reminded her why she couldn't let Karen win. But the emotional toll was starting to show. Sophie didn't deserve this. She deserved to be celebrated, not cast aside. Emily's protective instincts kicked in, and she knew it was time to take a stand. She wasn't going to let Karen tear their lives apart. But what could she do? She had no allies, no real support, just a community that seemed intent on shunning them. Emily's determination grew. She wouldn't let Karen get away with this. She would fight for Sophie, no matter the cost. As she sat there in the dim light of the kitchen, her resolve hardened. She would take this battle beyond the walls of the neighborhood. It wasn't just about Sophie's right to be part of something as simple as a school event. It was about their dignity, their place in the world. And Emily was ready to fight for it, no matter how long it took. The morning of the school event arrived, and Sophie's excitement was palpable. She had spent weeks preparing for the talent show, working tirelessly on her performance, her face glowing with anticipation. Emily could see her daughter's joy, and it filled her with both pride and dread. Sophie had been practicing her dance routine every day after school, using the mirror in their living room to perfect each move. It wasn't just about the performance, it was about Sophie having her moment, a chance to be seen, to feel normal, to be a kid. But Emily knew that as the event loomed closer, so did the dark shadow of Karen's influence. That morning, as Emily helped Sophie get ready, her mind raced. The phone call with Principal Rogers had done nothing to reassure her. The school hadn't taken any real steps to address Karen's complaint. In fact, Emily suspected that Karen had already been working behind the scenes, bending the school's policies to fit her agenda. The principal had promised to look into it, but Emily knew that with someone like Karen, someone with power and connections, it would take more than just a complaint. It would take action. It would take defiance. As the day wore on, Emily could feel the tension building in the air. She tried to push it aside, focusing on getting Sophie ready for the event. They would go, just like any other family, and enjoy the day. But as Emily adjusted the strap of Sophie's dress, she caught a glimpse of the street through the window. There, standing on her front porch, was Karen, her arms crossed and her expression hard as stone. She was waiting for them, watching from her throne on the edge of the neighborhood. Emily's stomach dropped. She knew what this meant. She grabbed her purse, helping Sophie gather her things. Sophie, oblivious to the growing storm, bounced around the house, her excitement a stark contrast to the heaviness in Emily's heart. They left the house, stepping out into the cool air. But as they approached their car, Karen stepped down from her porch, walking toward them with slow, deliberate steps. Emily, Karen's voice was cool, smooth, like silk over a razor blade. "We need to talk." Emily stopped, her eyes narrowing as she turned to face Karen. She had been preparing for this moment for days, but now that it was here, the words felt like they were caught in her throat. She clenched her fists at her sides, trying to control the rising anger within her. "What do you want, Karen?" Karen smiled, a smile that never reached her eyes. "I just wanted to remind you about the event today." "Sophie, she's still going, right?" Emily's pulse quickened. "Of course she's going. Why wouldn't she be?" Karen's gaze flicked to Sophie, who was busy fiddling with the ribbons in her hair. Her smile faltered slightly before returning, colder than ever. "Well, I just think you should be aware that there's been some concern about her participation," Karen said, her words dripping with condescension. "Some of the other parents feel uncomfortable with the way she stands out." Emily's heart thudded in her chest as she realized where this was going. "Are you seriously doing this now?" she asked, her voice trembling with barely controlled fury. "Sophie is a child, Karen. A child who deserves the same chance as anyone else. What's your real problem here?" Karen didn't flinch. You know exactly what my problem is. The last event was fine, but her presence disrupts the atmosphere. She doesn't fit with the aesthetic we're trying to maintain here. People want a certain experience, Emily. We all do. And frankly, Sophie doesn't belong in that experience. The words hit like a slap in the face. Emily felt her breath catch, the anger inside her rising to boiling point. Sophie was standing right there, within earshot, completely unaware of the venom that was being aimed at her. Emily's voice was sharp and controlled as she responded, "You can't be serious, Karen. This is about Sophie's disability, isn't it? You're saying she's not good enough, not normal enough to be a part of things. You're using her disability as a weapon. You're using it to destroy her." Karen's eyes hardened, and for the first time, her mask slipped just a little. She wasn't going to back down. "I'm not using anything, Emily. I'm just trying to make sure the community stays cohesive. You'll understand when you see the bigger picture. It's about the greater good." Emily took a step forward, her voice dropping to a low, furious whisper. "This isn't about the greater good, Karen. This is about your own narrow view of the world. You've always thought you were above everyone else. Well, I'm not going to let you get away with this." For a moment, the two women stood in silence, the weight of their words hanging between them like a thick fog. Sophie looked back and forth between them, sensing the tension, but not understanding it. Finally, Karen spoke again, her voice steely. "I think you should leave, Emily. This event is not the place for Sophie. I've already made arrangements, and the decision has been made. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." With that, Karen turned and walked back up to her porch, leaving Emily standing there, shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. The reality of what had just happened crashed over her like a tidal wave. Karen wasn't just trying to ruin this event. She was trying to take everything from Sophie, her right to belong, her right to be seen, her right to exist in this community without prejudice. Emily could feel the tears welling up in her eyes, but she wouldn't let them fall, not in front of Karen. Not yet. Sophie, still clueless to the gravity of the situation, looked up at her mother, her face full of excitement. "Mom, are we going? I can't wait for the show." The words hit Emily like a punch to the gut. She felt her heart break all over again. She forced a smile, brushing away the tears that threatened to fall. "Of course, sweetie. Let's go." But as they climbed into the car and headed for the school, Emily's mind was racing. Karen's words echoed in her head, replaying in an endless loop. She doesn't fit with the aesthetic. The drive to the school was a blur. Emily's hands gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white with the strain. She was trying to keep it together for Sophie, but every fiber of her being wanted to scream. As they pulled into the parking lot, Emily spotted the familiar faces of the other parents. But they were not looking at her with the warm smiles she had come to expect. They were looking with cold eyes, judging her, judging Sophie. It was as if Karen had already won. Emily knew she couldn't just walk away from this. She had to take a stand, not just for Sophie, but for every child like her who had been silenced, ignored, and shunned. But Sophie didn't see it. She saw nothing but the bright lights of the event, the chance to show the world who she was. As they made their way into the auditorium, Emily's stomach churned with a mix of dread and determination. She was going to fight for her daughter, no matter what it took. But it was already too late. The battle had begun, and there was no turning back. Inside, the crowd began to gather, the hum of excited chatter filling the air. Emily glanced around, feeling more isolated than ever. She knew that Karen's influence had already spread too far. The community wasn't just divided, it was already in the hands of someone who wasn't afraid to tear it apart. And as Sophie took her place backstage, ready to perform, Emily realized that the fight had become bigger than just this event. It was about everything they stood for, and about the world they wanted to build for Sophie. Emily's frustration was mounting. Karen had already taken the first steps to ruin Sophie's chance to participate in the talent show, but Emily knew this was just the tip of the iceberg. There was more at play than just a personal vendetta. Karen wasn't simply a neighbor with an opinion, she was the self-appointed queen of the HOA, and she was using her position to manipulate situations in the neighborhood, bending everyone to her will. Emily needed to know more to understand how far Karen's influence reached. So, after a restless night of tossing and turning, Emily decided to take matters into her own hands. She wasn't going to let her daughter's future be dictated by someone like Karen. The next morning, after sending Sophie off to school, Emily went to work. She didn't have any particular plan, but she knew one thing. She needed to gather information. She had heard whispers around the neighborhood for months about Karen's behind-the-scenes dealings, but no one ever spoke out loud about it. Emily was used to the tight-lipped conversations and the polite smiles that hid a far darker reality. The HOA was supposed to be a community organization, one that helped neighbors maintain the aesthetic of their environment. Instead, it had become Karen's personal playground where she wielded power with cold precision. And Emily was going to expose it. She started by visiting the local coffee shop, a small cafe that had become the unofficial meeting ground for the residents. It was a place where people gossiped, where secrets were spilled over cups of coffee, and where Emily knew she could gather intel without raising suspicion. As she stepped inside, the familiar chime of the door echoed through the cafe. The barista, a friendly young woman named Megan, waved at her as she approached the counter. "Hi, Emily." "The usual?" Megan asked, already reaching for the cup. "Actually, just a black coffee today." "I've got a lot on my mind," Emily replied with a forced smile. She took her drink and scanned the room. There were few regulars chatting in the corner, their voices low and conspiratorial. Emily knew this was her opportunity. She made her way over to a table where two women, Sarah and Louise, sat. They were friendly enough, but not particularly close. Sarah was an older woman, her hair graying at the temples, but she had always been a sharp observer. Louise, on the other hand, was in her 30s, and although she didn't speak much, she had an air of intelligence about her. Emily sat down across from them, her mind racing. This could be her moment. "Hey, Sarah, Louise," Emily said casually, as if they were just catching up. "How's everything? I haven't seen you both in a while." "Oh, Sarah said with a chuckle, same old, same old. Just the usual drama with the HOA. I swear, Karen's out of control these days." Emily's ears perked up, but she kept her tone neutral. "What do you mean? I haven't heard anything lately." Louise exchanged a quick glance with Sarah, then lowered her voice. "You didn't hear? Karen's been pushing her agenda for months now. She's got everyone on edge. People are scared to speak up, but she's been using her position to get what she wants." Emily's heart started to race. This was exactly what she needed to hear. What kind of things has she been doing? Sarah leaned in closer. "Well, it's not just about the aesthetics of the neighborhood. I mean, that's what she says, but it's more than that. Karen's been pulling strings for years, using her influence to control social gatherings, to steer the neighborhood's direction. If you don't do things her way, she finds a way to make your life difficult. She's a master manipulator." Emily's mind was spinning. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed was a different feeling altogether. But why? What's her endgame? Louise shook her head, her eyes flicking nervously toward the door. "It's about power. She wants everyone to be in line with her vision of how things should be. If you don't fit into that, you're out. And she's got the resources to make that happen. It's like a game to her and she's winning." Emily took a deep breath, her thoughts racing. This was much worse than she had anticipated. Karen wasn't just targeting Sophie, she was systematically undermining anyone who didn't fit her mold. Emily couldn't believe the depth of the manipulation, but she couldn't ignore it either. It made sense now. Sophie's banishment from the event wasn't just an isolated incident, it was part of a larger pattern of behavior that had been going on for years. Karen had been using the HOA as a tool to control the entire neighborhood, and Emily was starting to realize just how many people were complicit in it. "I think she's after you too, Emily," Sarah added quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "She's been spreading rumors about you and Sophie, talking about how you're a problem, how you're disrupting the harmony of the neighborhood." Emily's stomach dropped. This wasn't just about an event anymore. This was a full-scale attack on their lives. Karen was trying to destroy everything. Her reputation, Sophie's future, their sense of belonging. Karen was out to ruin it all. Emily's fingers tightened around her coffee cup, and she forced herself to take a deep breath. "Thank you, both of you," Emily said, standing up. "This really helps. I'll take care of it from here." As she walked out of the cafe, the weight of what she had learned pressed down on her chest. Karen had far more influence than Emily had originally realized. She had the whole neighborhood wrapped around her finger, using fear and intimidation to get what she wanted. The thought made Emily sick to her stomach. But now, it was time for her to turn the tables. She couldn't let this stand. Over the next few days, Emily continued to dig. She reached out to other neighbors who had remained silent, and while some were too afraid to speak out, others were more than willing to share what they knew. The more she uncovered, the darker the picture became. Karen wasn't just influencing the HOA and social gatherings, she had a hand in nearly every aspect of the neighborhood's functioning. From local charities to the way decisions were made at the school, Karen's presence was pervasive, suffocating, and all-consuming. But as Emily uncovered more, she also realized how dangerous this was becoming. The more she learned about Karen's manipulation, the more ruthless Karen's tactics became. Emily started noticing strange things happening around her house, her mail going missing, strange figures lurking near her yard late at night, and odd phone calls that always seemed to hang up as soon as she answered. Karen was aware that Emily was digging into her influence, and she was making sure Emily knew it. One evening, as Emily was working late in her office, she heard a soft knock at the door. It was Sophie, looking worried. "Mom, there's someone outside. I saw them by the window." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She quickly grabbed her phone, her mind racing. It was too late for a harmless visit. Someone was watching them. The fear she had been trying to keep at bay surged to the surface. She wasn't just fighting for Sophie's right to be a part of this community anymore. She was fighting for their safety, their freedom. Karen wasn't just trying to destroy them socially, she was escalating her threats, pushing Emily into a corner. And Emily was no longer sure how far Karen would go to win. As Emily stared out the window, the darkness outside seemed to stretch forever. She knew one thing for sure: this fight was just beginning. The calm that followed Emily's discovery of Karen's true nature was short-lived. What had started as a series of unsettling whispers and rumors now began to manifest into something much more dangerous. Karen, the queen of the HOA, was no longer content with just isolating Emily and Sophie from the community. Her vendetta had escalated into a full-on assault. She had made it clear that she wouldn't stop until she had forced Emily and Sophie out of the neighborhood completely. For the first time, Emily began to feel the weight of this fight. How deep and far-reaching it really was. The tension between them had been growing steadily, but now it was something tangible, something that could no longer be ignored. Emily had always prided herself on her ability to weather storms, but this storm was different. Karen wasn't just a neighbor trying to get her way. She was a force of nature, systematically using her position to tear apart everything Emily had worked so hard to build. It started with subtle actions, small, seemingly insignificant disruptions in Emily's life that no one else would have noticed, but which left her reeling. Sophie's schoolwork was mysteriously delayed, and school events started showing signs of sabotage. Fundraising campaigns for the school's special needs programs were mysteriously mismanaged, donations were misplaced, and there were whispers that Sophie's participation in any school event was a disruption to the community's harmony. Emily could feel the walls closing in as Karen's influence bled into every corner of their world. One evening, while Emily was reviewing her emails, she came across one that sent chills down her spine. It was from the local charity where Emily had volunteered for the past several years, an organization that helped raise funds for children with disabilities. The email was vague but accusatory, suggesting that Emily had been involved in a mismanagement of funds. It was signed by the head of the charity, a woman Emily had known for years. But the wording was suspiciously formal and cold, as though someone had coached her to write it. As Emily read through the message, she immediately recognized Karen's fingerprints all over it. Karen had gone after her social connections, planting seeds of doubt where they didn't belong. Emily knew she had to confront this head-on, but every time she tried to challenge Karen's growing power, her world seemed to get smaller. The more she uncovered about Karen's manipulations, the more she realized just how deep the rabbit hole went. She'd spent countless hours poring through old HOA minutes, discovering that Karen had made several key decisions that had been glossed over by the rest of the community, that had financially benefited her and her associates while isolating those who were critical of her rule. This wasn't just a neighborhood dispute. This was corporate-level manipulation on a personal scale, and Emily had become the target. But it wasn't just Emily's life Karen was ruining. Sophie's health, her safety, and her well-being became the next battleground. Emily started noticing small changes, things that were hard to prove, but impossible to ignore. Sophie came home from school one afternoon complaining of severe stomach pain. The doctors couldn't find any physical cause, but after a few more similar incidents, Emily started to suspect the stress of their situation was beginning to take its toll on Sophie's body. Karen's presence was no longer just in their social circle, it was creeping into their home, their lives, and even their health. Then came the tipping point. One night, Emily was working late in her home office, sifting through the stack of documents she had gathered to build her case against Karen. Sophie was in bed, and the house was eerily quiet. But then Emily's phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. The message was simple: "You can't hide. I'm always watching." Emily froze, her blood running cold. She knew Karen had been behind the harassment of their neighbors and the subtle threats against her. But this felt different. This felt personal. Her thoughts spiraled as she looked around the room, the walls feeling smaller and more suffocating. Was Karen watching them? Had she gone so far as to track her movements, her calls, her emails? Emily's mind raced as she tried to steady her breathing. She could no longer deny the truth. Karen was escalating her tactics, using every tool at her disposal to crush Emily and Sophie. But what Karen didn't know was that Emily wasn't going to back down. The next day, Emily met with a few of the neighbors who had reached out to her, individuals who had witnessed Karen's manipulations but were too scared to speak out. They had seen firsthand how Karen used intimidation to get people to comply with her vision of perfection. These conversations were not easy, people were afraid, and rightfully so, but Emily needed their help. If she was going to take Karen down, she couldn't do it alone. The more people who were willing to stand with her, the more power she could gather to challenge Karen's control. It wasn't just the neighbors she needed, it was evidence. Emily began recording every interaction with Karen, every phone call, every threatening email. She knew that without solid proof, her accusations would fall on deaf ears. Emily started to document everything: Karen's comments, her behavior, and her underhanded dealings with the HOA. It was a dangerous game, but Emily was now fully committed. If she couldn't expose Karen for what she truly was, then Sophie's future, and the future of everyone in the neighborhood, was at risk. But as Emily gathered her evidence, she began to feel the weight of Karen's power more acutely. One evening, as she was driving home from a meeting, she spotted a figure in the distance, a man walking along the sidewalk, his face partially obscured by the shadows. Emily didn't think much of it until she reached her driveway. There, hidden behind a tree, was a black car with tinted windows. The moment she pulled into her driveway, the car slowly started driving away, its headlights cutting through the dark. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. She had no proof, no way to confirm who was in that car, but she knew in her gut that it was Karen's doing. The surveillance had begun, and this time, Emily wasn't sure if she could protect Sophie from whatever Karen had planned next. The more Emily pieced together, the more she realized the stakes were rising and fast. She had to be strategic. If she made the wrong move, she could lose everything: her reputation, her home, her daughter's safety. But if she didn't act, Karen would win. Emily refused to let that happen. Sophie, meanwhile, began to notice the changes too. She'd always been a smart, observant child, and while Emily had tried to protect her from the worst of it, Sophie couldn't ignore the tension in the air. Emily's late-night phone calls, the constant stress, the whispered conversations. Sophie was no fool. She knew something wasn't right. One day, as Emily sat down at the kitchen table, Sophie came up to her, her face full of concern. "Mom," Sophie said softly, her voice trembling, "I don't like what's happening. Are you okay? Why is everyone so mad at us?" The weight of her words hit Emily hard. Sophie had been trying to protect her mother, trying to understand why the world around them was crumbling. Emily's heart broke for her daughter, but Sophie's courage gave her strength. Sophie, despite everything, was standing up for herself, just as Emily had taught her to. She had always been a fighter, just like her mother. With Sophie's encouragement, Emily made her decision. It was time to confront Karen. No more hiding. No more playing by the rules. She was going to expose Karen for who she truly was, no matter the cost. As the day of the confrontation approached, Emily could feel the tension in her body. She had reached her breaking point, but the fire inside her was burning brighter than ever. She had gathered the evidence, she had allies, and now she was ready to face Karen head-on. The stakes had never been higher. The fight for Sophie's future, and for their lives, was no longer a distant possibility. It was happening now, and Emily wasn't going to let Karen win. The day of the school board meeting arrived with a heavy sense of anticipation. Emily could feel the weight of everything that had led to this moment: the sleepless nights, the relentless digging, the threats, and the manipulation she'd uncovered. She had gathered every scrap of evidence she could, each piece a damning testimony to Karen's growing influence and the ways in which she had manipulated the neighborhood for her own gain. The battle had started small, a dispute over Sophie's participation in a school event, but it had grown into something much larger, something that would define not just Sophie's future, but Emily's ability to stand up against a bully who had spent years building her empire of control. As Emily stood at the door of the school board meeting, she glanced at Sophie, who was holding her hand tightly, her face a mixture of nervousness and excitement. Sophie, who had been the center of the storm from the very beginning, looked up at her mother, her eyes full of trust. "You're going to win, Mom. I know you will," Sophie whispered, her voice soft but filled with conviction. Emily smiled, her heart swelling with love for her daughter. "We're in this together. No matter what happens, we'll fight. We'll always fight for you." The door opened, and they entered the meeting room. The school board members were seated at the long, polished table, their eyes shifting toward Emily and Sophie as they walked in. At the far end of the room, Karen was already seated, her cold eyes locked onto Emily as if she were sizing her up. The tension in the air was palpable. This wasn't just a simple meeting, it was a war, and Emily had come to win. Mrs. Hayes, the school board president, Mr. Douglas, began, his voice formal but sympathetic. "We're here to discuss the recent events surrounding your daughter's participation in school functions. I understand this is a delicate matter, and I want to assure you that we will give everyone a chance to speak. Let's begin." Karen leaned back in her chair, her posture rigid with self-assurance. She was clearly prepared for this moment, but Emily had no intention of letting her dominate the room any longer. This was her time, and she was going to take it. With a steady breath, Emily stepped forward, pulling out the folder of evidence she had carefully compiled. She placed it on the table with a deliberate motion. She could feel Karen's gaze drilling into her, but Emily didn't falter. She knew the truth, and she was ready to expose it. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Emily began, her voice calm but firm, "I stand before you today, not just as a mother, but as a concerned citizen. I'm here to bring to light the truth about the influence one individual has had on our school and our community. That individual is Karen Williams, the president of the HOA. She has used her position to manipulate, control, and silence those who do not fit into her narrow vision of what this neighborhood should be." Emily paused, letting the words sink in. She could see Karen's jaw tighten, but she didn't stop. "I have spent the past few weeks gathering evidence. I've spoken to neighbors, reviewed HOA records, and compiled emails, phone calls, and messages that show how Karen has used her position to undermine Sophie's right to participate in school events and to build her own personal empire of influence. With a swift motion, Emily began laying out the evidence. Emails from Karen to the school, where she had lobbied for Sophie's exclusion. Minutes from HOA meetings where Karen had made decisions that benefited her personally while alienating others, and testimonies from neighbors who had witnessed her attempts to control every aspect of life in the community. Each piece of paper Emily placed on the table was a blow to Karen's carefully constructed facade. "I'm not just asking you to take my word for it," Emily continued. "I'm asking you to look at the evidence." Karen has worked tirelessly to create an environment of fear where anyone who dares to speak out against her is silenced. She has taken away Sophie's right to participate in events, not because of any valid reason, but because Sophie doesn't fit into her perfect image of what this neighborhood should look like. Karen's actions are discriminatory and unjust. The room was silent, the school board members exchanging glances, their expressions shifting from indifference to concern as they examined the evidence Emily had presented. Emily could feel her heart pounding in her chest, but she stood tall, knowing that she was fighting not just for Sophie, but for every other family who had been manipulated and controlled by Karen's influence. But just as Emily thought she might have the upper hand, Karen stood up, her face a mask of calm and cold authority. The room shifted with her every movement, and Emily knew the moment had come for Karen to fight back. "I think there's something you all need to hear," Karen said, her voice smooth and measured, almost too perfect. "Emily, you're making a mistake. You think I've been using my position for personal gain, but what you don't know is the truth behind all of this. What you don't know is that your precious daughter isn't who you think she is." Emily froze, the words hanging in the air like a cold gust of wind. What did Karen mean? She could feel the eyes of the room shift to her, waiting for the next move. Karen continued, her voice laced with venom. "Sophie's disability isn't just something that affects her. It affects everyone around her. I've seen it firsthand. The constant disruption, the emotional toll it takes on the other children, and the ripple effect it has on the school. But there's more. Much more. You see, Sophie isn't just special. She has certain tendencies. I've been in contact with several professionals who believe she may have a dangerous inclination toward violence. It's not something Emily is willing to admit, but I know the truth. I know what's really going on here." The words hit Emily like a thunderclap. She felt her breath catch, her entire body going cold. She turned to look at Sophie, who was now visibly shaking. Sophie's wide eyes filled with confusion, hurt, and fear. Emily's heart cracked. She wanted to yell, to scream at Karen, but she knew she had to stay composed. She had to protect Sophie. Karen continued, her words dripping with malice. "I've been trying to protect you all from what's coming. The truth about Sophie's condition, the danger she poses to others, it's something you need to face. And until you do, I'll continue to make sure she doesn't take part in these events. It's for everyone's safety." The room was dead silent. The school board members were looking at each other, their expressions uncertain. Emily felt as if the ground had been ripped out from under her. Karen had twisted the narrative, turning everything she had fought for upside down. But Emily couldn't let this stand. She couldn't let Karen's lies destroy everything. "Karen," Emily said, her voice shaking with both fury and determination, "you're lying. You're using Sophie's disability as a weapon. You're trying to turn this entire community against her. And now, you're trying to use fear to get your way. But you're wrong. You have no idea what Sophie is capable of. You have no idea how strong she is. And you have no idea how far I'll go to protect her." Karen's smile faltered, just for a moment, before she straightened her back. "You're deluded, Emily. I'm trying to help you, but you can't see the truth. You're blinded by your own pride." Emily turned to the school board, her heart pounding in her chest. "I've shown you the evidence. I've shown you who Karen truly is. And now, I ask you to make the right decision. Do not let her manipulate you any longer. Sophie deserves to be a part of this community, and she deserves to be treated with respect. We will not back down." The room was still for a long moment, and then the president of the school board, Mr. Douglas, spoke, his voice calm but firm. "We will take this into consideration. Thank you both for your time today." As the meeting ended, Emily felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. She had laid everything on the table. She had fought for Sophie for the truth and for justice. Now, it was in the hands of the school board. But as she walked out of the room, Sophie's hand in hers, Emily knew one thing for sure: this was far from over. The tension in the room was unbearable as Emily and Sophie waited for the school board's decision. The meeting had been long, and the air was thick with uncertainty. Emily's heart raced as she looked at her daughter, whose wide eyes reflected a mixture of hope and anxiety. Sophie had been through so much already, and this moment felt like the culmination of everything they had fought for. The battle with Karen, the harassment, the manipulation, it had all come down to this. The school board president, Mr. Douglas, cleared his throat, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, but the weight of his words carried an air of finality. After reviewing the evidence and hearing from both parties, the board has come to a decision. Emily held her breath, every fiber of her being focused on what was about to happen. She could feel the eyes of the entire room on her, and for a brief moment, it felt like the world had slowed down. Sophie squeezed her hand, sensing the uncertainty, but Emily knew they had done everything they could. Effective immediately, Mr. Douglas continued, "We are reinstating Sophie's participation in all future school events. Her presence and participation are integral to the diversity and spirit of our community, and we believe she has the right to be included, just like any other student." Emily's heart soared. A weight she hadn't realized she was carrying lifted off her shoulders. Sophie's face lit up, her smile as bright and pure as it had ever been. She jumped up from her seat, her excitement bubbling over, and wrapped her arms around her mother. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, letting the relief wash over her. Sophie was going to be okay. They were going to be okay. But the victory wasn't just about Sophie's reinstatement. Emily knew that the fight had been about something much larger than a school event. It had been about standing up against the injustices in their community, against the manipulation and control that Karen had imposed on so many lives. Emily had exposed Karen for who she truly was, and the damage Karen had done was now impossible to ignore. The board's decision was a direct reflection of that truth. As they left the meeting room, Emily felt a sense of closure. The struggle, the sleepless nights, the endless worrying, it had all paid off. But the journey wasn't over. This was just the beginning. The school board's decision had opened the door to change. Now it was up to Emily and Sophie to rebuild their lives and their place in the community. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Sophie was back at school, participating in events and making friends. The atmosphere at home grew lighter as Emily felt the weight of Karen's influence begin to crumble. But the most significant change wasn't the way the school embraced Sophie, it was the way the neighborhood started to change. The once cold stares and whispers had faded, replaced by reluctant acknowledgments and, in some cases, genuine support. Neighbors who had once been afraid to speak up began to distance themselves from Karen's toxic grip. Some of them even approached Emily to apologize for their silence, their complicity in Karen's manipulations. Karen's power, once so absolute, began to diminish. People saw her for who she truly was: a bully, a manipulator who had used fear to control those around her. Emily had exposed that, and now the community was starting to reclaim the space that Karen had tried to control. One afternoon, as Emily and Sophie took a walk through the neighborhood, Emily couldn't help but notice the subtle shift in the atmosphere. Neighbors who had once avoided them now greeted them with warm smiles. Some even waved from their porches, acknowledging them as they passed by. Emily's heart swelled with gratitude. This was the change she had hoped for, the kind of community that would welcome her daughter with open arms, where everyone had a place, regardless of their differences. As they reached the park, Sophie ran ahead, her laughter echoing through the air as she joined some other children who were playing nearby. Emily sat on a bench, watching her daughter with a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. Sophie was free from the fear and isolation Karen had tried to impose on her. And Emily was free, too. Free from the weight of Karen's manipulation, free from the anxiety that had haunted them both for so long. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the park, Emily and Sophie sat together on the grass, side by side. Emily looked at her daughter, her heart full. Sophie had always been the light in her life, the one who gave her strength. But now, Emily realized they had both become stronger together. They had fought for what was right, and in the process, they had reclaimed their dignity and their place in the world. "You did it, Mom," Sophie said, her voice soft but filled with pride. "We did it." Emily smiled, pulling Sophie close. "No, sweetie, we did it together. We always will." As they stood to leave, walking hand in hand toward their home, the camera lingered on their faces. The relief, the peace, and the strength they had gained from this journey were written on their expressions. The fight had been long, but it had forged a bond between them that nothing could break. And as they walked into the fading light, Emily knew that the future was bright for both of them. They had faced the darkness, and together they had emerged stronger, ready to take on whatever came next.